More than 8 in 10 global executives believe that their people feel good in their physical, mental, emotional, social, or financial well-being. According to a February survey of 2,100 people published by Deloitte and Workplace Intelligence. However, employees have a very different story to tell. During the COVID-19 pandemic, only a total of 53% of employees felt that their top leadership was doing a great job. John Petersen is the CEO and founder of Threshold Rising. He knows all about leadership and the importance of putting people first. The mission of his company and his core coaching philosophy is leadership is fellowship and the belief that trust is the currency of any relationship. Petersen comes to the lens of leadership from an educational perspective. He's been a principal, a teacher, and everything in between. And he also has some strong views on what makes a great educator and how we can make the most impact when it comes to making sure that we equally distribute educational equity. I'm excited to have this conversation of consequence. So without further delay, I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. I wish you a happy Friday, and I'll welcome you to the program. And I'm super excited to be with you today to talk to you all about leadership, my friend. Great to see you, and happy Friday.
Thank you, Kevin. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me on. I'm also excited it's Friday and excited to talk to you today. So, thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, right, John?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm in California, so I imagine you're closer than I am on the East Coast.
Yeah, but we'll both eventually get there, right?
Yes, that's right.
Absolutely. So, John, I know that you're the founder of the Threshold Rising, which is a company focused on leadership as a fellowship with the belief that trust is the currency of a relationship. So I'm wondering if you can tell me all about the company and the good work that you do.
Sure. Yeah. So I founded a company a couple years ago, coming out of the pandemic, called Threshold. And the focus of what I do is around team development and leadership coaching. Before that, I was an educator for almost 2 decades. I've done a lot of different roles within the system. I've been a teacher at a lot of different levels, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, so elementary, middle, and even actually I taught a creative writing course in high school at one point. And then I've also been a district leader where I was a director of school opening for DC Public Schools. I was also a vice principal in a middle school, a principal in an elementary school, principal in a high school, supporting a high school as well. So I've been in a lot of different roles in the school system, and all of that work taught me the really core concept of trust and building trust quickly within a community and organization to get to your goals. And in my case, it was to make sure that kids are learning. And I've always worked in very under-resourced communities and in Washington, D.C., and West Oakland, San Francisco, and in the East Bay. So my job has always been to build a community and support a community really that already has the effective solutions that they need, but just to highlight the key elements of trust to bring that out. So that's kind of where that belief came from. And in addition to that work as a principal, one of the things that I was able to do, or have always strived to do, is push myself physically. And a couple of years ago, I was able to be a part of a team that set 5 world records crossing the most dangerous ocean in the world, the Drake Passage. And I'll tell you a quick story about that hopefully will answer your question a little bit more on just this idea of leadership as fellowship. So imagine this: you're sitting in the middle of the ocean. There's no horizon in sight because 20 to 30 foot waves are rising up and down, and you look up and there's no sky above you because deep, dark gray clouds are covering it. You stare down at your arms and you're looking at your arms connected to an oar, but they don't feel like they're attached to your body at all. And a 30-foot wave bounces off the side of the boat and splashes your cheeks with 1,000 tiny little drops of water that feel like needles pricking your face. You're cold, you're wet, you're 300 miles from the nearest land, and you're feeling like you're all alone. And that was the feeling I had in one of the first major storms out on the Drake Passage. There were 6 of us in this boat, and like I said, we were attempting to become the first human-powered, unassisted vessel to cross the Drake Passage, and we were running in 90-minute shifts, so 90 minutes on, 90 minutes off continuously, 24 hours a day. And part of that was because when we entered these large storms, we needed to keep our bow, the front of the boat, straight into the waves. Well, in this case, this was the first storm I had ever experienced on a big ocean. And honestly, in that moment was regretting the decision that I had made to be there. And had almost the feeling like I maybe was going to die. And in that moment, what I decided to do is, we had a satellite phone on the boat, was call my wife and just say hi to her. And when I called her, I was immediately mentally thrust back into home. I could hear my daughter in the background crying because she wanted a toy, and my wife was sort of trying to make small talk. And here I am, sitting on 30-foot waves, thinking that maybe this might be the last time that I talk to her. And I tell you this story and answer your question around leadership as fellowship, because I think as a leader, in one of the lessons that I've learned, not just there on the ocean, but in other points too, is this idea of don't be a hero, be human. And leaders are constantly in flux with their values. And in this case, one of my core values is family. But at the same time, I had followed the value of ambition to be out on this ocean, thousands of miles from my family, potentially putting my family at risk by dying. And in that moment, it was just the feeling of utter regret. So I can talk to you about a little more about what I did afterwards mentally. But to your point about leadership as fellowship, ultimately, what the foundation of all of that is trust. And in that moment, I had to fully trust the 5 other people that were on the boat with me to get us to land safely. Because in that moment, I realized that the only reason that I needed to be out there at that moment was to get back home. So what I was going to do, whatever it took to do that. And I think the lesson in that parable is that, as leaders, we can often regret the decisions that we make and feel very alone. And I think that was true in that moment on the ocean, in the middle of the ocean, with a satellite phone, talking to my wife and feeling that feeling of regret for the decision that I had made. And just being thankful, I guess, that she would even put up with me to allow me to go on to something like this in the first place with the tiny baby at home. That to me is part of that trust. And also, the trust that I had in my teammates to help me get back home to my family, so that we were all stayed safe in what was a really dangerous situation. But yeah, I think, as leaders, we often feel like we're sitting alone, and often feel like maybe the decisions that we made, we regret those decisions. And it's kind of like what we do afterwards once we've made that decision, and how we sustain our ability to be human in the face of challenges is really a really important lesson, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, John, no one will ever accuse you of not being ambitious, my friend. So you got that going for you, right?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. And John, just a quick follow-up in terms of your experience within the educational sector. I'm curious how you define educational equity and how you look at today's education system.
Yeah, that's a really tough and tricky one. I think if you take it down to the level of a teacher in a classroom, what I would hope for my own child is that there's somebody in that classroom who cares for you personally, and also holds you accountable. And when we go back to this idea of trust, I like to say, and I've learned this from people, from my mentors, is trust is the antidote to stress. And so if we have a lot of educators who are thinking about that trust is ultimately the cornerstone of any type of successful classroom, that educators are constantly thinking about ways in which they can build trust with their kids. To me, that is a form of equity or equitable education, where every kid in the classroom feels like they belong. That's a really, really important thing, I think, to develop. Easier said than done. When you look at it on a more broad scale, education in general, we know that education is not equal in the United States. At least I'll use that as a case example. Not one classroom is not the same as all the others. And so, I think and when we're talking about equity, in that case, I think, my thought on it is, there are different, I'd say two things: that all communities have the right people and impactful solutions to deliver the change that they need, period. But not all communities have the right resources. And so, I think as educators, if we go in believing, going back to my statement, don't be a hero, be a human. If we go into communities believing, as educators, that we're going to be a hero, that we're going to solve all the problems, well, we're going to fail, because it's overlooking the fact that there's already, the impactful people and solutions in that community to make the change. What our mindset should be is, how can we be more human if we're educators? What can we do to listen? What can we do to ensure that once we've listened, we provide sustainable solutions to what the problems might be? So yeah. It's a huge broad question. I think, I always bring things back to trust. So that would be my quick answer on equity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that your core coaching philosophy also centers around trust, because you believe that the belief in your values make the leader, but the trust makes the team. So I'm wondering if we could dive into that ideology for me this afternoon.
Yeah. Values make the leader, trust makes the team, is a statement that I use often. And it's kind of like twofold as leaders, right? For values make the leader, values are about the individual, your individual why. They're super important, but trust is sort of the collective why. So if you think about it in that way, there's maybe concentric circles, like the leader in the middle and the team just outside of that. You have to work on yourself in order to be an effective leader, and you have to work on the team in order to be an effective leader. You have to do both. So values make the leader. We often have values that we believe, that we think we live by, and so, in some of the work that I've done, I work with a few collaborators on a leadership retreat for construction workers, the field leadership folks in construction companies. And we do this retreat, and doing it, I hear a lot, or I've heard from participants, nobody has ever asked me what my values are, which is honestly was a surprising statement to me to hear. When I started to think about it, it's like what is your roadmap, your daily roadmap? How do you operate? How do you operate every day thinking about the things that matter to you most? Because ultimately that's the type of leader who you are. And I'll tell you, I do some exercises to get to what those values might be. So in my case, I often think my values are integrity, family, and teamwork. But here's the tricky part about values is though you're often in conflict with them. And then going back to the story that I was telling about being on the ocean, I have ambition. I struggle often with this concept of be a hero and be a human, which is why I talk about it. It's an edge point of mine. So I have ambition to be out on the ocean with potentially setting world records, but at the same time, I have my family, which is the most important thing to me in the entire world. And obviously those things came into conflict. I think this is true for us as leaders, that when we establish our values, we often have blind spots, things that we don't necessarily see either. And if we're lucky enough to get feedback from people about when we're not living up to those values. And if we're introspective enough, we have the ability to kind of sit back and reflect and say, you know what, that wasn't in line with what I actually believe. So it's one thing to say what your values are, and it's a whole nother thing to recognize when you're not living those values, which for many of us, I would say probably all of us, we struggle to live up to the things that we believe every single day. So values make the leader is the first part of that. And then trust makes the team is the second part. So trust, I said values are the individual why, and trust is the collective why. So trust is something that's the foundation, I think, of relationships. I say trust is the currency of relationships, and relationships are the foundation of teams. And I believe that teams, more than individuals, fulfill really amazing outcomes. Oh, no, Kevin, not at all. I think, I already gave this example that I said around, teamwork. It's like, what is the value of the team? Well, the team is the group that pushes everyone forward. So individuals can think that they have all the answers and have all the solutions and know the right course of action and take the team and stand out front. But I believe that leadership isn't about standing in front of people. It's about standing with people. And so what are the tools that you have in order to create that sense of team through trust? And I think it boils down to some of the most basic things like listening as a key example. So, being out on the ocean, going back to that original story that I told about having that huge, immense amount of guilt and regret, talking to my wife on the phone in the middle of the largest storm I've ever been on in my life. And at that moment, I made a decision that the only thing I was going to do was get home. And so I needed to communicate that to all my other teammates amidst all of this chaos. Hey, I'm here to get home. I want to be safe. And then also just focusing in on that goal and being really, really committed to whatever that goal is. I think that's an effective tool for leaders as well, as you set a goal or a vision and you follow it closely, and you kind of eliminate distractions that might get in the way either for yourself or for the team. You got to be flexible, obviously, within all of that. And that's another, I think, lesson learned. But I think once the decision has been made on what the vision needs to be, I'm going to get home, that becomes the focus. And honestly, I wouldn't have survived if I didn't have that narrow focus after that conversation with my wife.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to have clarity of mind, isn't it?
Of course. Yep.
Absolutely. And John, talking to you, I'm fascinated to ask you about embedded leadership, because I know it's something that's important to you to really dig deep. So tell me about the importance of sort of being vulnerable, and the importance of exhibiting a vulnerability as a leader. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's sort of like the paradox of trust, is definitely vulnerability, where we see going back to my statement, don't be a hero, be human. We as leaders, or even people on teams, we want our leaders to be up on a pedestal, to be heroes, to have all the right answers, to think of all the solutions. And yet, as leaders leading teams, we also know that we don't have that. Or if we think we do, then obviously we probably are going to run into situations where we might be ineffective. And so, when I say vulnerability is a paradox of trust, the moments often where you can build trust the most with people is when you share your mistakes, when you say your shortcomings. I can remember the first school where I was a principal. I was less inclined to do that, and as a result, I think I struggled at times to get people to do the things that we needed to do at the school. And I think in the second school, the lesson I took away from that was create teams, create opportunities for more people to provide input, and set action and course for the community, rather than saying, here's what needs to be done. And being honest about the fact that, in previous experiences, when I had set the direction, it didn't always work out. And I think that to me is something that has been a lesson learned, and something I think that is true about trust, and the paradox of trust, that when you are willing to admit your mistakes to your team, that shows your vulnerability, and it actually in turn builds more trust with people, as opposed to constantly trying to be the person that has all the answers. So I think that would be my answer to your question around vulnerability and the importance in a team.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, if you'll indulge me for just a second, I'll share just a little bit about myself. But so I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy. Simply means that I don't have enough oxygen in my legs to walk normally. But I always say that I can either make my circumstances work for me, or I can work for my circumstances. So I'm curious to ask you about the notion of inclusion, acceptance, and really creating a pathway where we're all accepted. And when you look at diversity, equity, and inclusion today, where do you think we've made the most progress, and where do you think we still need to go?
Yeah. Well, I will say, part of the reason why I was inspired to come and talk to you is just your story. I think is pretty amazing, and I love what you just said about you make the most of what you have, right? The circumstances that you're in, and it's how you respond that is really most important. So for me, being on the show with you today is really an honor, and talking to you about and knowing your journey and where you are now, and the message that you're trying to send to others. So thank you, Kevin. I think to your question about where are we with DEI, that one is a broad one. I think on inclusion. So let's talk about inclusion. Like, how can we ensure that multiple perspectives and viewpoints are being heard, and that more people are included in conversations, besides the typical profile that fits or sits in many leadership roles, honestly, and not far off of looking like me, a white guy with a college education. I think what I've learned in my experience is that two things that I've said before. I've been a leader in very under-resourced communities for the majority of my career. And, you know, by, I guess the other piece of that is, you know, they're typically Black and brown communities. And so I've, you know, as the leader that I am, have learned to think that a community, like I said before, has the right people and the impactful solutions to make the change that they need. It's just that certain communities have fewer resources than others. And that comes from years of systemic inequity that you're talking about. And so I've been witness to this in the schools that I've worked in, and that were different than the community that I grew up in. How do we solve diversity, equity, and inclusion in general? I think is a very large topic that requires many more people much wiser than I. But I do think that it definitely starts with listening. And this idea that in order to understand each other more, we need to listen to each other more, and we need to be able to empathize with different perspectives. You know, I've been in some situations at schools where you know, there's been some really horrible things that have happened to families, and you know, from an outside perspective, potentially they look really bad, but from an inside perspective, you understand all the nuances that go into the challenges of poverty, and the trauma that comes along with it. And you know, I had a family at my school with a father who was shot and killed, with 4 kids at the school. He was ex-military, and it was a really tragic situation. And we as a school had to help and support and deal with all of the trauma that came from that, both with our staff and with the family. And you know, from an outside perspective, reading about it, you might see the quick hit on the news about something that happened, but when you're in it, and the reality is you're dealing with all of the challenges that come around with that. And so when I talk about listening, what I'm really talking about there is having a deep understanding of the impact that others have experienced in their situations. So I think for me, at the end of the day, you know, going back to my statement, communities have the right people, impactful solutions to make change. And in order to better highlight those impactful folks and the right solutions, it starts with listening, and being better listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, as an old sports reporter, I'm excited to ask you my next question, John. They tell me that you're a world record holder athlete, so tell me all about your athletic prowess and your passion for athletics. I'm fascinated to learn.
Yeah, so the story that I started with about being out on the ocean, and was my opportunity to get a couple of world records in ocean rowing. I was an athlete my entire life, high school, college, and after. And athletics were always the mental outlet for challenge. You know, the way for me to push myself mentally and physically. And so being out on the ocean was no different, although, you know, in some of the most extreme forms where literally your life is on the line if you don't perform. And so to me, that was sort of the ultimate mental challenge. How do you survive in the face of death with a team that is doing something that hasn't been done before, and through extreme circumstances, hurricane force winds, freezing temperatures, no sleep, dehydration, losing weight by the minute, all of those things that go into making you want to stop, but then continuing forward, because ultimately at the end of the day, for me, like I said, it became about getting home again. So that athletic piece for me has always been a part of my life, and it is my I like to say working out is my church. It's my way of regulating myself, meditating, and getting myself grounded. Whether that's a workout at the end of the day or taking on a really big challenge like crossing the Drake Passage.
Yeah, John, I live by the motto, always active, and with my disability, if I'm not active, my muscles contract faster, so I challenge myself every day to be at least 10 minutes active every day, whether it's lifting weights, I like to go swimming, and, walking is a big thing for me, and I have a couple of people who come and do physiotherapy with me, so it's important to stay active, isn't it?
100%. A lot of times that we forget our brains are connected to this body, and the one, the muscle that's sitting between our ears is probably the most powerful muscle we have in our body, or is. It's a line that I heard from a teammate of mine on the row, Colin O'Brady. But really, we forget that our minds can be connected to our bodies, and so we do need to be in touch with the signs that are given from our bodies. Often we don't realize that stress is being carried inside, literally inside of our muscles. And so, working out, if you want to get down into the science of it, and what you're saying is really like a release of cortisol, and an increase of oxytocin. And there's lots of different ways of making that happen for yourself. But the ultimate question is, you want to feel good, you want to feel your best. And the way to do that is I 100% agree with you through, through physical movement and mental challenge, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. And just very quickly before we move on, I'm just curious to get your thoughts on the positive benefits of athletics and how important that has on people's lives if they're athletic.
Yeah, I think, when we're kids, and if you're in team sports, ultimately, I think it's about learning to be on a team. And, taking it full circle to back to where we started at the beginning of the conversation, I really believe that teams, more than individuals, fulfill amazing outcomes. And so I think athletics is a great place for kids to learn how to work together, and share and celebrate and fail, probably most importantly. And so athletics is a place where I think you can learn all of those important skills that then impact the way the rest of your life goes. And I think there's a lot of kids who dream about being the superstar, and that's an easy thing to do. But most kids, you see that commercial, the NCAA, everybody's going to end up in a job other than being a professional athlete. And so athletics are the groundwork, I think, for being the foundation for teams and teamwork, which is often how we have to operate in the real world, in our jobs day to day. So that's what I would say about teamwork and the connection to athletics, and why I think it's so important, and how we use that to help ourselves, learn lessons about what's most important in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, I'm curious to get your definition of what an impactful educator is, and what do you think it means to make a meaningful difference as an educator?
Yeah, you asked me a little bit before about the impact of equity in education right now in our current state. I kind of mentioned that I think the ultimately a great educator is someone that cares for you personally and then holds you accountable. And so, taking this back actually to athletics, you mentioned why are athletics important? As a principal, when I was looking for teachers, I often looked for people who were athletes, because as a teacher, you're on your feet, thinking about building community and team, and often athletes tend to make some really great teachers too, because it's a physical job that requires also that mental push or mental fortitude to carry through challenges. And you're navigating 50,000 things at one time. So to me, an impactful educator is the person that just cares for you deeply and personally, and also holds you accountable. And I think about my own experience with teachers. I could list off the names of every teacher I had from kindergarten through 8th grade, probably 12th grade, if you wanted me to. Starting with Mrs. Ma and Mrs. Gilbert in kindergarten. And I remember walking into my classroom in my first year of teaching in Washington, D.C., in the Petworth neighborhood. And I opened up the textbook for my 5th grade classroom. And in the textbook was this abbreviated version of the novel Hatchet, which is a book by Gary Paulson about a kid who crashes in the wilderness and then in a plane and then has to survive. And it's a book that's often read in 4th and 5th grade for most of the kids in those grade levels. But in this school, again, a very highly under-resourced school, it was a chapter in a large anthology of stories. And I remember being in that moment and thinking back to the teachers who I had, who were so impactful on me, and probably the reason why I became a teacher myself, and said to myself, would they have allowed me to read an abbreviated version of Hatchet in this sort of like generic anthology, or would they want me to read the actual book, the actual novel? And so I went out and I bought the actual novel Hatchet, and I explained to the kids, look, there's a short version of this in this book, but we're not gonna read that. You deserve better than this sort of anthology. And so we ended up reading Hatchet, the actual novel Hatchet, as opposed to the shortened version in the anthology. So I use that story because I think, being a great educator is taking the lessons learned from those great educators that we've had, and then also, balancing, a sense of belonging with personal accountability. And for me, I wanted all of our kids to feel like they had the best opportunity. And for me, that meant not reading the anthology, that meant reading the book. And that's what we were going to do. So that's how I would describe an impactful educator, or somebody that makes a meaningful difference.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important that you only get one chance to make a first impression, and you never know who's watching, right?
That's it.
Absolutely. And John, I'm curious to get your definition of how we really sustain a transformational leadership. What does that mean to you to be a transformative leader, and how do we sustain it as well?
Yeah, I'll go back to my, one of my thesis statements here is don't be a hero, be human. And it's something that I'm constantly thinking about as a leader, because what that means to me is, if you're human, you are listening and you are learning constantly. And a hero has all the answers. A hero knows all the solutions. A hero does it the best. A hero has the most ambition. A hero makes everybody else better. But we can't all be that all the time. It's just impossible. And so to me, when I say be human, that's the transformational part of leadership. That's the part where our first move as a leader is to listen. And our first move to sustain that listening that we've done is to learn and grow. And so to me, that is transformational leadership, that you're constantly listening and constantly learning and trying to better yourself every single day.
Yeah, and talking to you, John, I'm inspired to ask you this one final question before I get to my last question. The question is, how do you define prosperity? Just as a general term, how do you define the word?
The word prosperity?
Yeah, how do you define prosperity?
To me, the thing that I would immediately gut react with is being a dad. I am lucky enough to be a dad of two little girls, and It's the hardest job I ever loved. And I think, when we're talking about coming out of a global pandemic and people are rethinking how they live their lives every single day and what is going to be the best thing to maximize both time and opportunity. For me, that's how I think about prosperity is how do I, for me personally, how can I both maximize my time with the people who I love the most and allow them to live the life that I think will give them the most happiness. And that's harder, easier said than done. But when you say define prosperity, I would say prosperity is being a dad and having a family. And then if you're able to give them the things they need to be happy, then I think you're doing pretty good.
Well, being a dad's going to be the most important job you'll ever have, right?
That's it. Yes, sir.
Exactly right. And John, just building on that, my final question for you is, when you look at your personal and professional legacy, how do you want that to be defined?
When I think about all of the things that I've learned from 2 decades of being an educator and the work that I've done as a leadership coach, and then my own personal life as a dad, a husband, I think I want people's interaction with me, whether we're virtual like you and me, Kevin, or in person. I want people to feel like they've been given a handshake, that they've been able to look somebody in the eye and say, I trust this person. And, I'm willing to either do business with this person or, love this person because of both the things that they're good at and the things that they're not. And I hope.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead and finish. My apologies.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah. So I hope, for me, I think I'm going to live by the statement, values make the leader and trust makes the team for a long time. I think that it's as leaders, we constantly have to be in touch with our values. And also, with our teams, we have to constantly be thinking about the levels of trust that we have with the members of that team. And so that would be the statement that I would stand behind as a professional legacy, that values make the leader and trust makes the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, John, if people want to get connected with you, what's the best way they can do that?
Yep. If you want to go on my website, thresholdrising.com, you can check out some of the things I'm working on in my professional life. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's John R. Petersen, and you can check out some of the endurance projects that I've worked on, biking from Oakland to Chicago, being out on the Drake Passage, and of course, the hardest challenge of all, being a dad. So would welcome anybody to go to those 2 places to find more about what I'm doing.
Well, John, I was inspired to have this conversation with you, and I want to thank you for the privilege of engaging in conversation this afternoon. And I want to thank you for your good work in leadership and making a difference in the space and really dominating as only you know how, my friend. Your work in the space and time on my behalf is most appreciated, and I want to thank you for being here today.
Thanks so much, Kevin, for having me on and for sharing your inspiring story with others as well.